Swimming is a sport, a safety precaution, and a display of grace and athleticism, or lack thereof. It also played a significant role in history, relating to, quote, religion, fashion, architecture, sanitation and public health, colonialism, segregation and integration, sexism, sexiness, guts, glory, and much, much more. Today, I am pleased to welcome Howard Means, the author of Splash, 10,000 Years of Swimming, a book which follows swimming through all of these topics, beginning in ancient Greece and Rome and ending with today's pools and beaches. I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Hey everyone, welcome to Timeless. I hope that you're having a great week. Just a reminder to please hit the subscribe button down below so that you can stay notified every time I post a Julie Noted news video or a Timeless episode. And also be sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Julie R. Hartman. Now, those of you who have listened to this show for a while or who listen to my show with Dennis Prager, Dennis and Julie, know that I was a swimmer growing up. I started competitively swimming at age 5, and that went all the way through to age 18. I did not continue it in college because unfortunately it became more of a drag than something that I enjoyed because it just got so competitive. But now that I am out of college and have had some distance from it, I like going in the ocean. I certainly like going in a jacuzzi, and I'm starting to get interested, if you will, of going back to my swimming roots. So lucky me to have stumbled upon Howard Means' book, 10,000 Years of Swimming. I also love history, so this has been a really interesting exploration of the history of swimming. Mr. Means is an author or a co-author of 10 books, most recently 67 Shots, Kent State and the End of American Innocence, which is actually being developed into a feature film. Mr. Means began swimming competitively when he was 5 years old, just like I did. He competed in college and then he coached for 7 years. He continues to swim in pools, rivers, lakes, and oceans, and anywhere else with water. He actually just told me that he installed a resistance pool in his backyard recently. Hi, Mr. Means. Thanks so much for coming on to Timeless.
Thank you for having me.
Well, before we dive into the history of swimming, let's just chit-chat a bit about our swimming experience. I told you, but I'll tell the viewers, that I was a sprint freestyler, but I didn't hear what your stroke was and what your events were, so please do tell.
Distance crawl was basically, although in college, they used to have freshman teams in college when I was a kid. You couldn't swim on a varsity team as a freshman, and it was always hard to get all the strokes covered, and I was the only person on the team that could make 200 yards butterfly. So I started doing the 200 fly when I was in college. And so normally I'd do a 200 free, 200 fly, and a 500 free in a meet. And then to the extent that I had a specialty, it was the 1650. I was always better at distances, but that was only for the ACC championship. I could compete in that. But distance has always been my strength. Sprint, I admire people who can sprint. I just couldn't turn it over that fast.
See, I admire people who could do long distance because I don't know if I could stay in the water for that long. And the thing about sprinting is you got to go 100%. But
Absolutely,
long distance, you have to temper it a bit. So it really involves more strategy and mental acuity than a sprinter does.
It's sort of hard not to get bored in the 1650, frankly.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, by the time you get to, if you're doing a short course pool, by the time you get to the 60th length, you think, oh my gosh, will this never end?
I used to get so bored during swim practice that I would count the tiles at the bottom of the pool. I think that's how I learned multiplication and addition they were super tiny. And then what would happen is that my goggles would get all foggy because, as you know, when you're swimming for a long time, they get foggy. And so the thing about swimming is you can't talk to anyone. You can't breathe, especially when you're a sprinter. My coach would tell me I could breathe one time in the 50 freestyle or 2 laps. I think I just said this, but you can't talk to anyone, and sometimes you can't even see because your goggles get all filled up. And that's certainly true in distance swimming. My gosh, you must not be able to see anything by the end.
Well, I think what I love about it, though, is the sensory deprivation. And I mean, there's nothing I love more than let's say I was in New Hampshire a couple of years ago, and there was a lake, and it looked like it was about a half mile to the other shore. And it turned out to be just about exactly a half a mile because I'm a stroke counter and I can figure out how far it is from one place to the other. But to go across there, and in the middle, there was about 100 feet of water underneath me. There was nothing anywhere near. And it just, your mind sort of floats free. What are you going to do? You just repeat the stroke, repeat it, breathe, repeat, stroke, repeat. And I love that sensory deprivation part of it.
Wow.
That's to me enormously relaxing, and it sort of frees the mind up to think about other things in a sort of non-conscious way. And a sort of I do a lot of subconscious resolution of problems, especially when I'm writing. By going out and I get stuck, I just go swimming. Often when I finish up, I get out of the water, and there it is, the answer.
That's really interesting. I remember during swim practice, I would think about things that I learned that day in school. And I think it was just really helpful for my retention and my memory to go through what I had learned and have that time where I could think. And I'm sure, I really believe it made me a better student. Certainly the balancing sports in school was difficult, but it was great to have, physical exercise coupled with the reflection that is unique in swimming.
Yeah, and look what you're doing today. See, it made you. Even if you don't want to get in the pool again.
We'll move on in a moment to the subject, which is history. But I'll say this: I mentioned this at the beginning of the episode. Swimming by the end for me was kind of miserable, honestly, because it just became so much about winning. It became so competitive, and I felt such enormous pressure to do well that I stopped loving it. And even though I had great coaches, there were so many benefits to it, but I can tell you that despite it being really hard at the end, it has totally made me into a better person. Now that I'm older, I can see the benefits. I have discipline, I have hard work built into me, and also things by comparison don't seem that hard, because when you are in a situation when you are sprinting and you can't breathe and you feel like every limb in your body is going to fall off, staying up late at night to do some work is kind of nothing by comparison. So I really think swimming, all sports build character, but swimming especially because it's so isolating and because of all of those, what did you say, sensory kind of pullbacks?
Kind of sensory deprivation.
That's what it was, yes. It makes you really strong. So now on to the history of swimming. Can you please provide us with a brief synopsis of 10,000 years of swimming?
Oh, of course I can.
And I'm going to time you in less than 30 seconds. 50 freestyle time. You got to do it.
Well, this book begins actually 8,000 years BCE in Wadi Sura in the southwest Egyptian desert, which is and now is the driest spot on Earth. And it's also home to the oldest known pictographs of swimmers. So it was an irony that I just wanted to figure out at some point. I mean, part of this was just, I thought I was writing a book about a subject I knew. I said, well, I've written about a lot of books, but I said, well, let's write something about something I know and it'll be fun. And then I started researching and I realized I knew almost nothing about swimming. I didn't know that there were pictographs of swimmers on cave walls at 1,000 feet in Sahara. I didn't realize that for 1,000 years swimming died out as a sport in Europe. I mean, it was the Greek swam, the Roman swam, all the Mediterranean countries swam. And when swimming reemerged in England and parts of Europe in about 1500 or 1600, people had no idea how to get in the water. I mean, it amazes me that the knowledge of swimming that didn't happen. I should add in Africa. It didn't happen among indigenous Americans, but among Europeans it died out, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is simply the Dark Ages. The Romans had beautiful. They were engineers. They built the baths at Bath in England. They did all sorts. They had their own baths. And when the civilization died out, plumbing failed, the water failed, rivers got polluted, and people became insular. They stayed inside. They stayed at home, and they had no leisure time. And swimming is sort of a function of leisure time, unless you're doing it for military purposes. So that part fascinated, and then to watch the how people swam in the early part of the rediscovery in England, up until the almost the late 1800s, there was a controversy in swimming circles over whether the best way to swim was flat in the water or standing up in the water. An Italian wrote an entire book about the advantages of swimming like a seahorse, vertical in the water. There's no advantage to it at all. If you try to do it, it's absolutely impossible. But the fact that these mysteries existed about a basic human function just fascinated me. And then as you get forward, all sorts of things come in: fashion and segregation and other factors. But yeah, that's the short course.
Mm. Was there a kind of mythological quality that was given to or seen by people who possessed swimming abilities? I can imagine if you go back several thousands of years, people who could swim and then on top of it were beautiful swimmers were probably seen as kind of superhuman.
Well, there was certainly a lot of mythology that built up around them, and also a lot of the epic story, Gilgamesh, and Beowulf, for example, has a spectacular scene in which Beowulf and I think it's Grendel's mother, if memory serves me, do the spectacular battle in the North Atlantic for days at a time. And that was a sign of ultimate strength to be able to do that. The gods often used in Greek and Roman. The gods often used water to punish people. They would turn them into a net, or they turn them into something else. And of course, the Odyssey is an aquatic adventure in the Mediterranean that involves a great deal of swimming and a lot of mythological figures. So yeah, I mean, it also, I mean, it doesn't surface at all. I did this, searched for swimming and references of swimming in the Bible, in the Old Testament, and the only one I could find was I'm sorry, I forget the exact language of it, but somebody is being criticized because they swam like. The description describes somebody trying to make a breaststroke motion in dung, in manure, and I wish I could think of the exact words for it, but the Bible makes almost no reference. But Hammurabi's code in Babylonia has many references to swimming as a form of punishment. If a woman was caught sleeping with a man not her husband, she would be bound and thrown into the water, and her husband would then, if he had any remorse, he'd have the choice of jumping in and saving her. Or in a couple other cases involving infidelity, the woman would be thrown in the water without being bound. And if the gods favored her, they would lift her out of the water and take her to the shore. And so the smart thing to do if you're going to have infidelity was to learn to swim, so you can get out of the punishment. But at any rate, there's a lot of that stuff was just fun to research and write about.
So what was the purpose? And I imagine that it has changed over time. I mean, certainly competitive swimming took a few centuries / millennia to get going. But what was the original purpose of swimming? Was it to have fun? Was it to show off?
It's hard to say. Military was part of it. The Greeks had a great advantage when they did war with Xerxes and the Persians, because if a Greek ship went down, people knew how to swim to shore. If a Persian ship went down, people had no idea how to swim to shore, and they drowned wholesale when a ship went down. Caesar had a great advantage in the battle of in Alexandria, because his men knew how to swim. Actually, the Egyptians had some swimming skill too. But as a military skill, the Greeks and the Romans both were both. In fact, they built pools. There's a huge palestra pool in Pompeii, the size of half a soccer field, which was for military training purposes.
Wow, that is so interesting. So I never advertise a product that I do not use myself, and I use my pillow all day. Literally, I walk into this studio wearing my slippers, and then at night I go home and sleep on my pillows. So I want to encourage you all to get deep discounts using the promo code Hartman. You can get a queen size My Pillow for $19.98. A regular price for a queen size is $69.98. So you see there's a huge discount there. And a king size My Pillow is $10 more than that. If you go to mypillow.com and click on the radio and podcast square and use the promo code Hartman, my last name, Hartman, you can get deep discounts on all My Pillow products. Again, the queen size My Pillow is $19.98. You can also call 1-800-566-6745. That's 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman to get deep discounts on all of their great products. We forget that would be something that was needed back then, because obviously warfare is fought very differently now. And we have things like life jackets, which I imagine the Greeks, Egyptians, Romans, and Persians.
Oh my, yeah,
did not
nothing
have.
like it. No, nothing like it. No, and you know, until the late 1800s. I'm sorry, the late 1800s. Graduates of the Naval Academy were not required to know how to swim.
Wow.
At the U.S. Naval Academy, which I found just a fascinating. You know, if the ship went down, you went down with it. I guess almost literally.
Yes.
But there were a lot of just horrible, mass drownings. Wooden ships would catch fire, pleasure ships out of London, etc., and people would die by the hundreds when they were not very far from shore at all. Mm. So there was a great push at some point, to require at least sailors to learn how to swim.
So you have talked about swimming's influence on a wide variety of things. I read the list in the introduction, and you just mentioned fashion and segregation and colonialism. Let's start with fashion. What does swimming have to do with fashion?
Well, it had a lot to do with liberating the female form. I mean, when you look back again at what bathing in England in the 1800s. You go to Brighton, you go to wherever you were going. A woman would get in a conveyance where they would change into a swimming costume. The conveyance would be horse-drawn out into the water. There'd be dippers out on the water, and there'd be on the far side some men on the beach could not see them. They'd be covered up all over the place, barely a foot. Probably an ankle maybe would be a very bold thing to have shown. Men didn't have to go quite that extent, but as late as the 1930s, U.S. national park rules forbid men from swimming in anything. They had to wear shirts that at least covered their armpits and didn't cover their chest. I mean, you have to remember, and women were just, women swimmers were enchained in their clothes almost. Mm. And then the fabulous Annette Kellerman, one of the great figures in American, she's an Australian actually, but she became a really daring filmmaker and her own stunt double and various other things, and she would dive off cliffs, etc. But she walked out into a Boston beach in 1907 in a suit that covered neither her legs nor her arms, although it had things up in the shoulder, and it became known as an Annette Kellerman, the suit. And she was arrested and brought before a judge, and she said she told the judge that no woman could swim. How did she put it? No woman could swim No woman could swim in, I forget, it's clothes that had to be hung on a wash line. I forget the exact line. And the judge thought about it, reasoned with me, and he said, you're absolutely right, and he let her off. And that moment liberated the female form from encumbering costumes, bathing. They called them bathing costumes, is what they were actually. And she's quite a character, and she just changed. She absolutely changed fashion dramatically and became herself quite a clothes horse.
Well, such costumes can be dangerous, I mean, just wearing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Imagine
drag you
wearing
down.
your Yeah, yeah, exactly.
As I know, because one of the things that we would do training when I was a competitive swimmer was our coach would say, put on a sweatshirt and swim because of,
Yes,
the weight. And it
right.
certainly made us better. That's really, really interesting. It's funny, though, because you're saying that swimming liberated female sexuality or gave them
In large part, I think it played a big role in that. Yeah, I mean, it definitely did. And these aquacades that became very popular in the 30s.
right.
I mean, they were showing a lot of leg, a lot of arm, and men flocked to them. Men flocked to see Annette Kellerman.
I'm sure.
She did shows at hippodromes where she would, in Boston and New York and Philadelphia and Chicago, and she would climb up. She would, in the top of the theater, she'd be 60, 70 feet up there, and she'd dive into what looked to be a barrel. I mean, it's amazing stuff to think about. The kind of stuff the Roadrunner tries periodically in cartoons. Not the Roadrunner, the wolf tries periodically in Wile E. Coyote. Tries periodically in those shows.
That's interesting to contemplate because when I was a swimmer, trust me, I did not look sexy when I was swimming. My suit, I actually had suits that went down to my knees, that covered my knees and then went up, and I guess they didn't cover my shoulders, but like full body, tight suits.
I remember that. Yes, of course. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Suck in all of your body fat so that you would be a torpedo in the water. It was like the opposite of female liberation. The more the suit covered and sucked you in, the better. I remember before my event, I would have to start putting on that swimsuit 40 minutes before, because it took 20 minutes, and you'd like, it would also take all your energy, because you'd like have to yank it up you and stuff all of your rolls in the suit.
Right.
And then you couldn't put it on earlier because it would literally cut off your circulation if you didn't.
Right.
Oh, those were the days. And you wonder why I didn't swim in college. Anyway, so we've covered fashion. What about segregation?
Well, that was the last frontier, really, for swimming, and it was the last frontier for segregation, actually, integrating pools. It was, you can see footage of it in a lot of cases. St. Louis, other cities, they tried to integrate the pools in the public parks. Men and boys waiting, white men and boys waiting with baseball bats. It was not just in the South. I mean, it was in the North too. Although it's funny, for a long time there were pools. They made pools in New York, sort of for immigrants, ghetto people, and they would be right along there. They box water from the rivers, basically, and they could swim in them, and they were mixed race. But about beginning pools that had a huge flush of growth in pool building in the early 1900s. Country clubs came into existence in the 1920s. Huge municipal pools were being built all around the country. And when that started to get going, that's when segregation was generally enforced, even in the North, but particularly in the South, of course. And because for various reasons, one is that there would be the great fear was black men and white women. And this is why people got lynched all over the country, black men and white women. And it was especially dominant at the pool because people were relatively, undressed. And so it raised the stakes, and it was, I can remember, I'm humiliated by this to think about it, but in the early 60s, the late 50s, I was a lifeguard at a public pool in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. And I sat in that lifeguard chair for 2 weeks at a time, for 2 weeks in a row, and never noticed that outside trying to get into the pool, they had a lineup of one white, one black, one white, one black, one white, one black. And the white would go up and apply ask for a card, and they give him the card. He pays $2, what do you have to pay? The black would go up, and the guy behind the desk would say, I'm sorry, if you'll just fill out this application and leave it with us, we'll get back to you. And of course, they never get back to them. And they do that, for a whole lineup of people. So they were trying to prove the point, which they did very well. But I'm humiliated to think that I never realized that was going on while I was sitting in the chair. I should have.
You know, when you just mentioned country clubs, it made me think that swimming is a sport. I don't want to say that is confined to the wealthy, but it certainly probably it has a higher concentration of those who are wealthy than not, because you need a pool, and building pools are expensive, and not everyone obviously has a pool in their home, but where would you have access to a pool? Certainly there are public pools, but you need swim lessons, that costs money. You know, it's not, obviously swimming is different from something like horseback riding, which is extremely, you know, elite centered, because you need a horse, but still, swimming must be concentrated among the particularly wealthy.
And when they built a lot of high schools in America during the WPA, during the Depression, they were very good about building high schools and putting pools in those high schools, because that was part of the idea. The schools were often integrated, and it would be a way to teach African Americans how to swim. And when I was a kid, again, I was in a high school that had been built in the WPA in 1936, had a pool. And there was swimming. Every boy had that. In one day in 10th grade gym, they'd say everybody could take off your clothes and report to the pool deck. And you had, God, I don't know, 60 kids standing around, naked, wondering what the heck's going on.
Oh gosh!
And you had to dive in, had to jump in one end and swim to the other end. And if you weren't willing to try it, or if you couldn't do it, then you had to take a 6-week segment on swimming. And it was very rare that a black kid in my high school would even get in the water. And the toll of that in drownings, and the disproportion, the racial disparity in drowning deaths remains to this day. And it's a huge disparity out of all proportion of the population.
You know, my mom always says when we talk about my swimming past, that as much as, it was fun to have me competitively swim, and I was good at it, and I was, fulfilling my potential. She said she also, when I was 5 years old, enrolled me in swimming because it's just a safety precaution, I mean, people can drown in 2 inches of water. People can drown in their bathtubs. And so you're right about that racial disparity. My dad, the college that my dad went to, they used to hold swimming tests for every incoming freshman. And one year, a black student drowned. And then that's what made them get rid of it. And it's just crazy that it took that tragedy in order for them to get rid of that. Before we have to part,
that nobody was there to rescue him. My God.
Right. Yes. Well, I'd have to. My dad wasn't there at at that horrible incident, but maybe the lifeguard wasn't there, or the lifeguard was kind of not paying attention. I also lifeguarded.
They were doing a lot of people at one time. Yeah.
Yes.
It could have been all sorts of things. Yeah.
The thing about lifeguarding is that you can't look away for 2 seconds. If you got to really pay attention. I remember that from my lifeguarding days. Before we part, I would like to ask you a little bit about ocean swimming. I love ocean swimming. I actually did competitive ocean swimming through something called the Junior Lifeguard Program here in California. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And there was something so fun to me about ocean swimming, and there was something so miserable to me about pool swimming. Can you psychoanalyze me for a moment? Why do you think, and by the way, that's true of a lot of people, they prefer ocean swimming to pool swimming. Why do you think that is?
I think it's even greater sensory deprivation in a way. Speaking of which, there was a race in 1927, Santa Catalina race, swimming from the mainland to Santa Catalina, and Wrigley of the gum fortune, William Wrigley, put up what amounted to, I think, a purse worth now about $250,000 to $325,000. It's probably the biggest swim pot or jackpot ever. And all sorts of people lined up in the beach, and exactly 3 people made it to Santa Catalina. They didn't drown. There were boats all along the way. But I love ocean swimming, and I used to go straight out from the North Carolina coast, go straight out. Then my brother-in-law, who was assistant manager of Marina down there, and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Why?" He said, it's nothing but sharks past the sandbar. I said, oh, God.
Oh gosh, is right.
So then I started swimming, parallel to the beach, right at the sandbar, just inside the sandbar.
Yes.
So I don't do it like I used to do in the old days.
Oh my gosh. I remember when I would ocean swim and we would be out far. I mean, we would not be by the sandbar. We would be out at the buoys, maybe half a mile out, perhaps
Wonderful.
deeper.
Bliss to do that swim. Yeah.
And I would be thinking, shark, 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 the whole time. And maybe that's what made it fun and daring. And there's something cool, like, because also when you're ocean swimming, you ride the waves into shore. We were taught, how to catch a good wave.
Right. Yeah.
You got to run in and out of the water. You got to do the high knees. It was just, the whole thing was really fun.
And the risk is part of it. You're right. The risk is part of it.
Yes.
That sense of you never know what you're gonna find out or what you might hit.
You just feel badass. Let's just call it what it is. You feel you feel really badass. Mr. Means, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you. And you've kind of inspired me. Maybe I'll go back into a pool sometime soon.
Great,
I haven't been in years.
Tell me, let me know if you do. I'll feel like I've done something useful in life.
Will do. Take care and enjoy your resistance pool.
Thanks. Great fun talking. See ya.
And thank you all so much for joining me. I will see you all soon. Take care.